Welcome to this quick video showcasing Rev-Trac's flexible approval process. Today we're going to run you through a complex approval process. It's highly configurable. In this case, it in no way replicates anything we would suggest or recommend for customers to use. We can adapt our approval processes to anything that our customers require. This is just to show how flexible it can be and some of the options you have available when using Rev-Trac. So I'm going to start off by creating a request. This one, we're going to use something which is similar to an ITIL strategy. And typically you would put the business requirement into this field. We choose a project which typically reflects the track or the trajectory of the transports, and also a type, which will normally reflect the type of work being undertaken within this change request. In this case, I'm going to use the ITIL request type. The first thing we'll notice is a few fields disappear to cater for the needs of this specific request type. We've also got the team field, which has now become mandatory as part of the change requirements. So I'll go and choose the finance team. The team can reflect anything. It could be a department. It could be as simple as red team and blue team. It could be something like basis or change advisory board. It's very flexible, and we walk our customers through the best use of each field during the implementation process. I'll go ahead and save this one. And now we can see it's generated a request number, which is 85. It's in a status of new, and we have the details available to the users. Down the left-hand side, we've got some approvals. This is essentially the steps which drive this Rev-Trac request. We can see it starts off with something like a specification and workload estimate, then needing a business approval. The rationale here is that perhaps the business demands that a request is done or some sort of work is performed. They will then send it to the technical team to write up a specification and provide a workload estimate. The business will then assess this, determine whether they are happy with the specification and the cost associated with delivering the work, and then if they are, they'll give it approval. This is quite common for the ITIL approval process, and so we're able to build that into the strategy. We can then see it moves to in progress, which is when the developer starts working on the changes. They perform their own unit testing, they perform some code review, and then start triggering migration to QA. We then have some steps including user acceptance testing, some business approval for production migration, the actual technical migration to production, which is two-stage in this case. We have a CAB approval and basis approval. Once it's in production, we also have some post-production validation steps. Again, this is just a sample. It is not a prescription for anyone to use. In fact, we are seeing that ITIL is becoming a little bit old-fashioned, and people are using more agile methodologies for delivering change. What I'm going to do now is just change a few fields and have a look at how Rev-Trac responds to this. So the field I'm going to change is the class field. At the moment, it's in new. I'm going to choose to unlock protected fields. Class is considered one of the more serious fields because it can affect the strategy or the approval process being used. So now that I've moved it to emergency, we'll have a look at the approvals now, and we'll see that the steps are quite different. The rationale here is that emergency changes sometimes don't need that specification and business approval, and the developers often just need to start working on this so that they can get that change, remedy, bug fix, whatever it is, into the production system as soon as possible. Just to show off the flexibility of the tool, what we have done in this case is we've actually moved the specification and workload estimate as well as the business approval to the very end. So they would happen after the post-production validation. This is not realistic, but again, we're trying to emphasize that we can have severe adjustments to the approval workflow based on attributes of the request details. Another thing to note here is, and because we're bypassing a bit of the approval from the business and some of the due diligence required before development occurs, we've added an additional approval here, the emergency approval for the production system. And that's to avoid people basically sending things that they're not authorized to send to production and basically rorting the system by way of using an emergency change instead of a normal change. I'm going to change that back to normal now, and we'll continue to work through the workflow process. So when we look at the approval strategy again and start to attempt to approve the specification and workload estimate, we'll see that we are receiving an error message. This one is relating to the requirement for a specification document reference. The key thing to note here is the reference requirement. A reference is a special thing in Rev-Trac. It refers to an external system. In this case, I'm using Salesforce as our system of record. We have a specification document here. You can see I'll just copy the document URL, and I can associate that with my references tab here. So when I add a new reference, we choose that type, which was specification document, insert the unique value, and add that. Go ahead and save. And what we'll notice now is that when I click on this, it knows that this is a Salesforce value. So it will now launch me into Salesforce. And we can see we've arrived at that specification document there. That will work with any similar tool, Solution Manager's documentation, SharePoint, Documentum, and other document storage facilities that generate unique URLs for the document locations. That can also be used in other areas. It doesn't just need to be specification documents. It could be test scripts, test results, anything that relates to the change that's stored on an external system. Moving back to the approvals now. When I attempt to approve it again, you'll notice again Rev-Trac is trying to enforce some detail to be included, and in this case it must complete a estimated field. Okay, the estimated field is on the details screen. It's over here. It's currently got a 0 value. So I'll put some sort of a value that can be regulated and configured to operate against time or something to that effect. In this case, I've just added a value of 10. Now that Rev-Trac has detected that I've completed the tasks that we are enforcing in this process, I'm able to continue the approval of this request. Okay, there we have the specification and workload approval. We can see the requirements have been met. Automatic workflow email is then sent to the next person in the process. It will be me approving this step, but wearing the hat of a business approver this time, I'm able to go ahead and approve that status, which will once again send workflow emails off to the developer, notifying them that there is a change for them to go and work on. They'll be able to use the references to discover what the specification requires. They'll be able to review the estimates and make sure that they're happy to oblige and keep in line with the estimates. And when they're ready to do so, they can go ahead and approve the in progress step, which lets the business and development team leads know that they're currently working on this request. So I'll just cut across to SAP, make a change to this object. We'll notice on creation of a new transport, the Rev-Trac enforcement pop-up arrives. I can associate this to my Rev-Trac request. If I don't know the number, I can also drop down and find it in a list. And that will associate the transport to the Rev-Trac request. It's not possible to bypass that step either, unless specifically configured for individual users. And that step associates the transports with the Rev-Trac change request. And we can see there's our new transport. We can see there's our new transport. And this is now ready to be tested or otherwise. So now I'll go ahead and approve the unit testing step. Okay, as the programmer. And we can see that there is now a requirement to add a test plan attachment. Okay. The attachment is different to the references because we physically store documentation inside of the SAP database. Obviously, there's some pros and cons to this. It is a document stored and saved the version that was put in at the moment that it was added to the system. Unlike references where you can continue to modify and update the external document, an attachment is stored at that moment in time. Just find a example, test plan, and here we have a test plan attachment. So moving along, we can continue the approval process, and once again, as the programmer, sign that the unit testing is complete. The next step is the code review step. So as a developer, I can either approve or reject this step. Rejecting it will send it back to the developer and in progress, and they'll have to re-perform their unit testing after making additional changes. I'm going to go ahead and approve this one. And we can see when an appropriate person is ready to approve the migrate to QA step, that can be done. Go ahead and approve this. We can see that changes from D75 will be queued and migrated to Q75. Choose to continue and approve this step. And now that it's gone green, we know that it's been a successful migration into the target system. We also know this because Rev-Trac has approved the in QA status. And if we look at the approval history and the audit trail, we can see that in every case, I have been the person who has approved these steps. You can see the various role that I was taking as I performed the approval. And then you can also see that the in QA status was approved by AutoMig, which is the automation assessing the outcome of the migration. In this case, it was a successful migration, so it was approving the in QA status. In the event of a failure, this would not be approved. Workflow would be sent out to the developer and they would have to investigate. For the next step, we have the user acceptance testing. I could go ahead and approve this, but in this scenario, I'm going to reject it instead to show you what a rejection might look like. Choosing to reject, it might be something as simple as the button's on the wrong side of the screen, or you've got some incorrect spelling, or whatever it might be, but it's not quite right. So please try again. Go ahead and reject that. Again, workflow email is sent out every step of the way. We can also see that it's been moved back to in progress. And we can see the status is rejected. Please try again. The developer would be able to investigate this, hopefully a more meaningful reason for rejection, and then they would be able to respond accordingly. So again, emulating that encounter, go ahead and change that Z_Orlando again. Okay. We can see it's locked to request 85. I am working on request 85, so that's not an issue. And what we will notice on the Rev-Trac side is that we now have 2 transports associated with this change. Okay. If there were a scenario like we forgot to add the data dictionary object, and the data dictionary object needs to be going before the program, so the program's migration were failing, we would also be able to change the transport sequence, which would be valid at the time of migrating and be honored across the approval process through any subsequent system. Okay. That's not the case in this scenario, so I'm going to leave the transports as is. I'm going to go ahead and approve this. Again, unit testing, we need to go through these steps again. This time the programmer is happy that they've completed the unit testing correctly. They can have another programmer perform this code review. Again, the migration to QA. I will add that only the additional transport is added to the QA system unless we specifically request that both transports are migrated. For example, that data dictionary program example, only the additional transports will be added. Okay, we're in QA now. We'll go ahead and approve the user acceptance testing. Business approval for production. Again, this can be done by a manager. I will take a moment to note that in this case, the manager is being sourced from the finance configuration team. I happen to be in all of these teams and positions, but this would be sourced from the finance config team. If, for example, we were to change it to the HR team, we can also notice at this point that the HR config team manager is sourced as one of the appropriate approvers for the step. Go ahead and approve that. What we can also see now, 2 approvals for the migration to production, one being the change advisory board approval. This is sort of like a rubber stamp, as it will not trigger the technical approval or migration to production. But what we do have is a basis approval for production. Now, we don't suggest that basis people are performing these migrations, but it is an example of how some customers do choose to use Rev-Trac. The reality is basis people can be quite hands-off and only deal with basis type issues such as communications or system health, rather than having to deal with day-to-day transport management. Wait for that migration to complete. Okay, that's now in production. If we have a look at the technical, we can see that both of these transports have been successfully migrated to Q75 and P75, which are our quality and production instances. I'll now perform some post-production validation, which could be any user. In this case, we have the owner performing that. Owner might be the person who made the request initially, or some sort of development team lead who is functionally responsible for those areas. We now have a completed Rev-Trac request with a full audit trail of every step that's occurred, successfully and automatically migrating those changes into the production system.